Hi, and welcome to Watch It Played. My name is Rodney Smith, and in this video, we're going to learn the 1 to 4 player game, Hutan, Life in the Rainforest, designed by Asger Harding Granerud and Daniel Skold Peterson, and published by the Op in partnership with Sidekick Games, who helped sponsor this video. Hutan is the Indonesian word for forest, and that's appropriate because here we're traveling to Indonesia to plant flowers, grow trees, and attract animals as we compete to create the most spectacular patch of rainforest we can achieve. So, join me at the table and let's learn how to play. To set up, shuffle the deck of flower cards, which have this back. Then use that deck to deal 9 face-down piles containing 3 cards each in a 2-player game, 5 cards each if you have 3 players, and 7 cards each in a 4-player game. Or think of it this way. Each stack will have a number of cards equal to the number of players times 2 minus 1. In this video, we'll assume we have 3 players, meaning each stack will have 5 cards. And any leftovers you return unseen back to the box. Nearby, set out these flower and tree tokens, or keep them in the box and draw from there as needed during the game. I like to do a little of both, drawing more from the box to replenish the supply of tokens I have available for players as these get low. Nearby, also create a supply of all of these included wooden animals unless you have a 2-player game, where you'll instead return 1 of each back to the box. These are the rainforest boards, and they come in 4 different types, which you can distinguish by the uniquely colored circle found in one of their corners, which on their other side is shown as a square. Have every player collect 1 of each type, and then 1 player should create a random 2x2 layout from their 4 boards, picking random sides and orientations so it looks something like this. Then every other player arranges their boards to match that layout as well. For your first game, they recommend that all players use this specific layout where all 4 dots are arranged in the center like this, which we'll do in this video. Finally, pick someone randomly to be the first player and give them this pangolin token. And that's the setup. In Hutan, Life in the Rainforest, players will be planting flowers on their boards, growing trees in their spaces, and trying to fill in the areas of their boards in order to attract animals. All of these things can help you score points in various ways, and if you have the most points by the end of the game, you win. The game itself is played over 9 rounds. At the start of a round, the player with the pangolin token picks any 1 stack of face-down flower cards, flipping it face up into what is known as the market, so that each card can be easily seen. Then the round begins, and it will be divided into a series of turns, starting with the first player who's holding the pangolin token, and then going clockwise around and around the table twice, so that each player will have had a total of 2 turns. And on your turn, you'll complete 3 phases in order, starting with planting flowers. To do this, pick any 1 face-up flower card from the market, and then collect the matching flower tokens it shows from the supply. So here I'd gain yellow, blue, and gray. After collecting the related tokens, you then discard your chosen card, or return it directly to the box, because either way, it will not be used again later. With your flower tokens collected, you must now place them onto your rainforest boards, keeping a few rules in mind. Each board is divided into 9 spaces indicated by printed lines like this, or waterways going between them. The flower tokens you just collected must each go into their own separate spaces, but they must also be connected to each other, meaning each one must be adjacent to at least 1 other flower you're placing this turn. So this is one way I could have arranged them, or maybe I would have done this or this and so on. It's even okay if they go from 1 board to another or across waterways. However, if the spaces they go into only touch on a corner, that does not count as being connected. So placing them like this would not be allowed. So I'll just put this one back here. Also be aware, 3 of your boards will have what are known as lake spaces. This is a space that is either half or fully made up of water. Flowers can never be added to these spaces. And in case you were wondering, the order of the flowers on the card you originally collected and discarded doesn't matter. You can place the flower tokens it provided you with in any order. In other words, this blue flower doesn't have to go between the yellow and gray flower. These can be arranged however you like as long as you follow the placement rules. Now, there are a couple of other placement rules to consider, but those will only come into play on future turns. So let's pretend for a moment that it is our next turn, and we're in this plant flowers phase again, and chose a card from the market at that time, which now gains us 2 blue flower tokens. Remember, the flowers you collect on your turn must each go into their own spaces and be connected to each other. But you're allowed to put a flower on top of one you placed in a previous turn if it's the same color. So I could set this blue flower on top of this one and maybe put the other one here, since they are still connected to each other. Just be aware, no more than 2 flowers can be in the same space. Also, you cannot put flowers you collected during the same turn on top of each other. So I couldn't place this one here and then add this one on top, since I gained both of them during the same turn. And here's one final placement rule. Once there are flowers in your rainforest, the first flower you place each new turn must be set adjacent or on top of a flower already in your rainforest. So I could place these here, since at least one of them is connected to previously placed flowers. But I have to ensure that all the flowers I'm placing this turn are still connected to each other. I couldn't put one of them here and then the other one over here, because now these two aren't connected. This flower would instead have to go into one of these 4 spaces. I've set up this example just to show you another placement that does not work. Let's say I had these 2 flower tokens to add to my board. If I put this one here, it is connected to flowers I had previously placed, but now I have no way of adding this flower, so it connects to the flower I was placing this turn. So I wouldn't be able to add this here in the first place. Instead, I'd have to place them in an arrangement maybe like this. Okay, so now we understand the flowers you're placing during a turn can't be put in the same space together, but they must all be connected to each other, and aside from your very first turn, at least one of the tiles you add must always connect to ones already on your board. Also, flowers of the same color can be put on top of each other, but no more than 2 flowers may be in each space. Now, here's a card to be aware of. If you see a multicolored flower like this, it means that if you choose it from the market, you then take 1 flower of any card you like to plant for your turn, discarding the card after as usual. I should also mention, you must place every flower from the card you took. If you take a card from the market and then after realize, oh, there is nowhere that I can legally place all the flower tokens from this card, then just put the card back in the market and take a card with flowers that you can place. Now, in the very rare situation that there are no cards in the market with an arrangement of flowers you can completely place, you'll still pick 1 card to take, but you will immediately discard it and place no flower tokens on that turn, and instead move on to the next phase of your turn. Also note, in the very rare case that you run out of flower tokens in the supply, just use a suitable replacement. All right, that's how you resolve the plant flower phase of your turn. Then after, you resolve the grow trees phase. And to help explain this, I'll create some examples on my boards here, like you might see later in the game. In each space with flowers stacked on top of each other, you must return the top flower from each to the supply, replacing them with a tree. There are different styles and colors of trees, but which type you place doesn't matter, so pick any one you like. Also, in the very rare event that you run out of trees in the supply when you would need one, just use a suitable replacement. Trees will be worth points at the end of the game, so this is why you'll want to stack flowers together in the same space so that you can get trees onto your board. Now, if you have several spaces with 2 stacked flowers, the order you replace their top flowers with trees doesn't matter. Once you're finished growing any trees as necessary, it's time to move to the checking for perfect habitats phase of your turn. But before we get to that, I need to explain an important concept. Your rainforest has what are known as areas made up of 2 to 5 spaces each that are surrounded by waterways. So here's an area of 4 spaces. This one has 2. And on the other side of this tile, you can see an area that has 5 spaces. Remember, there are water spaces, and these are not considered part of any area. Each of the areas within your rainforest will have some numbers listed with it. And we'll learn what those numbers mean later, but ignore them for now. Instead, pay attention to the icon showing various squares. This reminds you of how many spaces that area has. So these 4 squares tell us that this is a 4-space area, where the 2 squares here mean this is a 2-space area. An area is considered complete once all of its spaces are filled with flowers of the same color. So this is a complete area of blue flowers, and this is a complete area of yellow flowers. You can ignore trees. They don't affect whether or not an area is complete. All that matters are the tokens underneath them. This is an area that has a flower in each of its spaces, but they're a mix of colors, so this is known as a mixed area, not a complete one. Here we have an area with some flowers, but also empty spaces. This is known as an unfinished area. At the end of the game, you'll gain points for completed areas, but lose points for mixed and unfinished areas. As we'll see, an area that is still completely empty at the end of the game won't gain or lose you points. Understanding what a complete area is will help us as we move on to the third phase of your turn, checking for perfect habitats. Here you look to see if you have any complete areas, which again is an area completely filled with flowers of a single color, that also has a tree on each of those spaces. If you do, this is known as a perfect habitat, and you may now replace the last tree you added to that area with an animal from the supply matching the color of the flower in that space. Sometimes in phase 2, when I know I'm creating a perfect habitat, I'll put the last tree I added there on its side as a reminder of which tree was the last one I placed, so I'll know which one to replace if I do choose to put an animal into its space. Animals will score points at the end of the game, as we'll see, but attracting an animal is optional. I could have instead left the tree here, keeping the animal in the supply. You'll usually want to attract an animal if you can, but you may only attract at most 1 animal per turn. So if you had more than 1 perfect habitat, you'd need to decide which one, if any of them, you'd like to attract an animal to. Just be aware, you can only attract an animal to a perfect habitat that you created during that turn. So if we choose not to attract an animal here during this turn, we won't be able to attract an animal to this perfect habitat on a future turn. Also, once all animals of a particular color have been taken from the supply, no one else can attract animals of that color for the rest of the game. After placing an animal in your perfect habitat, you also get the option to fertilize. To do this, add a flower to all spaces adjacent to that animal where a flower could legally be placed, which you'll remember does not include diagonally. You may choose to add flowers to only some of the spaces or none of them if you wish, and these can be a mix of different colors. Also, if you end up creating a stack of 2 flowers in the same space, even though we're now in the 3rd phase, you still replace the top flower with a tree. Normally, after a player has completed their check for perfect habitats phase, their turn is over and the next player in clockwise order will take their turn. However, after the first player of a round has taken their turn, before moving on, they must now add their first player token to the market. When collecting from the market in the future, the player taking their turn at that time may pick this token instead of a card. And doing so means they'll be the first player to take a turn during the next round. Also, when you claim this token from the market, the symbol here means you gain any 1 flower from the supply to add to your rainforest boards. The reason the first player adds this token to the market after their first turn is to ensure that it's not here for them to claim during their first turn. This gives other players a chance to collect it first if they want. If they don't take it and it comes back around to this player's turn, well, then they could collect this token at that time if they want. Either way, turns will continue around and around the table until each person has had exactly 2 turns. When you have, the market will be empty. Every flower card and the starting player pangolin token will have been collected, meaning that if it's your turn and only the pangolin token is left, then you'll have to take that during your plant flowers phase. Either way, with the round now over, if there are still piles of cards left in the supply, you'll prepare a new market as before, flipping the cards from one of the stacks face up, and then starting a new round of turns, beginning with the person now holding the pangolin token. At the end of a round, if there are no more flower piles left in the supply to flip face up to create a new market, the game ends and it's time for final scoring, which you can calculate using a sheet from the included score pad. First, every player gains 2 points for every tree on their rainforest boards, recording it on this top row. Then it's time to score animals. In each area where you have an animal, check the value shown there with this paw print symbol and gain those as points. After gaining all of your animal points, check each completed area you created, which again are areas where every space is filled with flowers of the same color. Sometimes these will also have animals and trees, but they don't have to, as we see here. Either way, you now earn the points showing on the far left by the spaces icon of that area. You'll record these total animal and complete area points that you earned on these 2 lines of the score sheet here. Then check every area of your board that is mixed, meaning it has more than one color of flower in it. And also check for unfinished areas, which are any with flower tokens on some of its spaces, but not all. You now total the values shown by the spaces icon of each of those mixed and unfinished areas and record that in the spaces for it along this row, but you'll subtract that amount from the points you've earned so far. Just be aware, any areas that are completely empty, you ignore. They don't earn or cost you points. You then total the points you've earned, and the player with the most points wins. If there's a tie, the tied player who went earliest in the last round of the game wins. There are 2 variants included in the game, a family variant meant to make the game a bit more forgiving, which is played the exact same way, except animals you attract will not fertilize spaces. And at the end of the game, you don't lose any points for your mixed or unfinished areas. There's also an advanced variant. This is played following the rules for the regular game, but during setup you collect and shuffle together these ecosystem cards which have this back. You then draw 5 randomly to put face up where the players can examine them, returning the rest to the box. At the end of the game, after the regular scoring, you'll also earn points for fulfilling the goals each of these show, which you'll fill into these related spaces of your score sheet. For example, this card earns you 2 extra points for every tree you have in spaces along the outside edge of your rainforest boards. We're not going to go through each of the ecosystem cards, but how they work is explained here on the back of the rulebook, so refer to this when they come up during your games. The game also comes with a variety of scenarios you can play where you'll set up using specific combinations of ecosystem cards and board layouts in an effort to reach the listed minimum scores. There are also challenges you can attempt to accomplish in any of the games you play, as well as modifications you can apply to your games. And all of these allow you and your friends to chase achievements by marking them off on these tracks. There are also rules included for solo play, but all of those elements I'll leave for you to discover on your own. Otherwise, that's everything you need to know to play Hutan, Life in the Rainforest. If you have any questions about anything you saw here, feel free to put them in the comments below and I'll gladly answer them as soon as I get a chance. You'll also find forums for discussion, pictures, other videos, and lots more over on the games page at Board Game Geek, and I'll put a link to that in the description below. And if you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a like, subscribing, and clicking that little bell icon so you get notification anytime we post a new video. And if you'd like to support us directly, you can join our Patreon team, which I'll have linked below. But until next time, thanks for watching.